The House Armed Services Subcommittee on Strategic Forces will come to order. We welcome everybody to our hearing today. It's a hearing titled President Obama's Nuclear Modernization Plans and Budgets, the Military Requirements. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here and the time it took for them to prepare for this hearing. It takes a lot of time, and I know it's aggravating, but it's very helpful to us, and we really appreciate your service to our country, but also the time and energy it took to prepare for this hearing, and you're making yourself available. Because of scheduling, we've kind of gotten in a time crunch. So the ranking member and I have agreed to dispense with our opening statements, and we would advise the witnesses that your opening statements will be accepted for the record, and ask each of you if you could spend about 3 minutes just summarizing the broad text so we can get to the meat of the hearing, which is really the Q&A. So our witnesses today are the Honorable Frank Klotz, Administrator, National Nuclear Security Administration, the Honorable Robert Scher, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy, Plans, and Capabilities, Admiral Cecil Haney, Commander, U.S. Strategic Command, and General Robin Rand, Commander, Air Force Global Strike Command. And with that, General Klotz, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the nuclear modernization program. This committee's leadership and its steadfast support for nuclear security enterprise have been vital to the nation's ability to maintain a credible deterrent and a safe, secure, and effective nuclear arsenal. The nuclear deterrent is a foundational capability of U.S. national security. Although it has been decades since the end of the Cold War, our nuclear enterprise continues to play an essential role in preventing conflict and deterring attacks upon the United States, our armed forces, and our allies and friends in an increasingly complex and unpredictable international environment. We must therefore maintain nuclear deterrent capabilities not only for ourselves, but also for our allies and partners around the world. As NATO reaffirmed just last week in its Warsaw Summit communique, and I quote, "The strategic forces of the alliance, particularly those of the United States, are the supreme guarantee of the security of the allies." Now, following direction provided by successive presidential budget requests and in congressional legislation, the Department of Energy and the NNSA are currently extending the life of 4 of the weapons in our stockpile and modernizing the facilities and infrastructure at our national security laboratories and production plants. The scope, budgets, and schedules of the LEP, the infrastructure modernization, and the DoD delivery systems have been fully integrated and coordinated in a tightly coupled plan. As a result of consistent funding provided by Congress and the significant improvements NNSA has made in program management over the past 2 years, all of our LEPs are on schedule and within budget. However, we are long overdue for an updated, smaller, safer complex that will meet military requirements. I can think of no obstacle that poses a greater risk to the long-term success of our work than the current state of NNSA's aging infrastructure. To address immediate mission needs, we've begun major investments in the capabilities identified in the Nuclear Posture Review, including building a new uranium processing facility in Tennessee and replacing the chemical and metallurgy research building at Los Alamos in New Mexico. We are also pursuing third-party financing and public-private partnerships to complement traditional line-item capital construction projects as a faster and, in some cases, more effective and efficient means of providing appropriately sized and modernized facilities for our 21st century operations and workforce. We believe greater use of such approaches should continue to be aggressively explored, and we appreciate this committee's strong endorsement of that view. In closing, America's nuclear deterrent remains a foundational capability for the security of the United States and its allies. NNSA will continue to assure the stockpile remains safe, secure, and effective without nuclear explosive testing. But achieving our plans for tomorrow's stockpile requires adequate resources, balanced investments, and a constancy of purpose. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this afternoon, sir.
Great. No pressure, Mr. Scher. You're recognized for 3 minutes.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I will dive right in. President Obama's approach to reducing nuclear dangers has consistently included 2 key pillars: working toward a world without nuclear weapons and maintaining effective deterrence along the way. Because we cannot responsibly count on achieving global disarmament before the U.S. arsenal ages into obsolescence, we must proceed with modernized replacements to maintain our nuclear deterrent for us and our allies. In multiple reviews, the administration concluded that stable deterrence is best provided by sustaining our nuclear triad and dual-capable aircraft. The triad and DCA provide the credibility, flexibility, and survivability to meet and adapt to the challenges of a dynamic security environment without requiring us to mirror every nuclear weapon systems others might employ. The need to sustain effective deterrence and strategic stability drives the requirement to modernize U.S. nuclear forces, and we must make investments now to have replacements ready when needed. Contrary to frequent mischaracterizations, we are not spending $1 trillion on nuclear modernization. The modernization costs spread over 20 years will be an estimated $350 to $450 billion. While not a small amount of money, as you know, the total defense budget in fiscal year 2016 alone was over $580 billion. The cost for nuclear modernization is substantial, but it is not unreasonable for what Secretary Carter has called the bedrock of our security. Our modernization plan is also consistent with the President's Prague agenda. It directly supports U.S. nonproliferation and disarmament objectives by enabling reductions in our arsenal while continuing to assure allies that they do not need their own nuclear capabilities. Claims that U.S. modernization signals a nuclear arms buildup or a renewed arms race do not fairly characterize our activities and those of other countries. Recapitalizing the triad will preserve existing military capabilities for preventing both large-scale and limited nuclear attacks, even as threats evolve. To deter massive nuclear attack, the United States must maintain a force that is invulnerable to a disarming first strike. Strategic stability requires a solid foundation that is not susceptible to any single point of failure, and each leg of the triad makes its own unique and critical contributions. While a massive nuclear strike would bring the greatest devastation imaginable, the more acute threat might be a limited attack aimed at coercing rather than destroying the United States or its allies. An adversary faced with losing a war of aggression might use a small number of nuclear weapons against U.S. forces or allies in an attempt to force capitulation. Our unwavering commitment to the security of our allies should make it clear that this would be a grave miscalculation destined to fail. Nuclear deterrence and disarmament share the same ultimate goal of reducing the risk of nuclear war. As we continue to work towards a world without nuclear weapons, effective nuclear deterrence is an imperative we must not ignore. Thank you and this committee's support for that effort.
Admiral Haney, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and distinguished members of this committee. I'm honored to be here today, not only to be with these professionals, but in representing all the sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines and civilians that provide strategic deterrence day in and day out. These professionals represent our most precious resource and deserve our unwavering support. As a result of their efforts today, our nation's strategic nuclear deterrence force remains safe, secure, and effective, and ready, and strategic stability is sustained. That said, our capabilities as a whole have lasted well beyond their design service life, and it is crucial that we modernize our strategic deterrence capabilities which underpin our national and global security. You know the threat. You've had many briefs, including with me, over countries like Russia, China, North Korea, and their pursuits associated with nuclear capabilities. Comprehensive strategic deterrence and assurance and escalation control require a long-term approach, and is far more than just nuclear weapons and platforms. The President budget for 17 provides a great balance between national priorities, fiscal realities, and begins to reduce some of the risks we have accumulated because of deferred maintenance, sustainment, and modernization. This budget supports my mission requirements, but let me be clear, there's no margin to absorb new risks. When you look at our triads, we must move forward with replacement programs for our intercontinental ballistic missile programs. The Ohio replacement program is my #1 priority due to the fact that we already have a degradation in that capability over some years due to delays in execution of that program. Similarly, our bombers provide us air-delivered nuclear weapons which offer unique strategic deterrence value associated with their capability that provides both strategic and extended deterrence. And our stockpile is safe, secure, and effective, but it's the oldest it's been. And as a result, we need to continue to move forward with life extension programs in our strategy called the 3+2 warhead strategy. That's a long-term approach. At the end of the day, we must ensure that no nuclear-armed adversary can think that they can escalate their way out of a failed conflict. They must perceive that restraint is the best course of action. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral Haney. General Rand, you're recognized.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, members of the subcommittee, as I complete my inaugural year as the Commander of Air Force Global Strike Command, thank you for allowing me to appear with my United States Strategic Command boss, Admiral Haney, to represent our Stryker Airmen. As you know, Air Force Global Strike Command was created to provide a focus on the stewardship and operations of two legs of our nation's nuclear triad, while also accomplishing the conventional global strike mission. A key to our continued success will be our ability to modernize, sustain, and recapitalize our forces. Therefore, it is imperative we be flexible enough to operate seamlessly in a world that continues to rapidly change. Potential adversaries continue extensive, some claim unprecedented modernization efforts across the full spectrum of their nuclear capabilities. Therefore, Air Force Global Strike Command's mission set needs to continue to evolve and grow as we strive to provide highly effective combat forces to our nation's combatant commanders. Hence, my focus is to make sure Air Force Global Strike Command is right-sized with our manpower and resources while balancing necessary modernization and recapitalization programs. I look forward to addressing any questions you have about our modernization plans for the Minuteman III ICBM system, our bomber fleet, the Air-Launched Cruise Missile, the UH-1N helicopter, our current B-61 weapons series, our nuclear weapons storage areas, and our nuclear command and control communications weapon system. Finally, I am prepared to offer my opinion on the consequences to our nation's and our allies' security if these already long overdue modernization efforts are not carried out according to their scheduled timelines. Again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee to highlight the need for modernization across Air Force Global Strike Command. I stand ready to address your questions.
Thank you, General. Thank all of you for your outstanding statements. I want to start the questioning. Admiral Haney, I want to ask you about the overarching strategic picture in the national security environment that our nuclear forces are operating within and trend lines that you see right now. You've been doing this a long time. And as Deputy Commander at Strategic Command, around the time when our current nuclear consensus was forged in the Strategic Posture Commission, the Nuclear Posture Review, the New START Treaty, and the commitment to President Obama's Nuclear Modernization Plan. So you've seen where we were in 2009, and certainly have a good sense of where we are now, and I think where we're heading, based on the conversations I've had with you. So give us your professional military opinion. What do you see as the trend lines in our national security and our strategic picture since 2009? And are things getting better or worse?
Chairman, thank you for the question. You know, as I look at over this time period, and it is unfortunate that we see where our relationship with Russia has occurred, starting with that is one of our 5 challenges you often hear us talk about: Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and violent extremists. Russia has not only modernized a lot of their capability in terms of the nuclear part of the business. That includes not just silo-based intercontinental ballistic missiles. They also have mobile-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, which means they can move them around, harder to find. They also have modernized their submarine program. They're continuing to do so. And they've also modernized some of their air capability and continue to do so, including air-launched cruise missiles, both conventional and nuclear variants. Russia has been working on modernizing both conventional and nuclear capability, as well as cyber and counter space capability. And capability is one thing. It's what they do with it and how they talk about it is just the other thing. The other piece that has changed is the provocative nature of statements that have been made by Russian leaders associated with that, and the display of their capabilities, such as long-range strategic aircraft flights in other areas around the world without transponders on and those kind of things. What I would say is other provocative kind of actions that when you add them all together, it is not in a good place. And I'm hopeful that that will improve associated with our whole of government efforts, which is a big part of deterrence going forward, but that's Russia. China, while you are looking at some of the activity in the South China Sea, has also been a country that has also developed and modernized their nuclear and strategic capabilities in the same areas, nuclear, space, and cyber. And in particularly in the nuclear piece, they're not as transparent. When you look at Russia and the United States, we have the associated treaties, such as New START Treaty, that allow us transparency and visibility, which is a good thing in terms of those weapons that come under that treaty. It doesn't cover all the non-strategic nuclear weapons that Russia has, but in China's case, we don't have such a thing, so we don't have the transparency in terms of not just what they have, but in the direction in which they're going. And then, of course, North Korea has been in the news quite a bit here in terms of their aspirations and associated tests, both nuclear tests, missile tests, and what have you, even recent at-sea tests that shows that piece. Those are the things that I've seen specifically change. In Iran's case, of course, having the joint agreement there has put a change, in my opinion, in the other direction by at least giving us leverage and also some visibility in terms of what's going on in that nation. While they still have other activities, a lot of testing going on with missile programs and what have you, from a nuclear standpoint, there's a mechanism now, and that piece is different as well. So in the balance of things, I've gone through those particular areas in a succinct manner, clearly in an unclassified form, but it is something that we have to balance in terms of maintaining strategic stability given those directions and developments that those nations have been after. Oh.
Well, thank you. As you and I have discussed, there's some outside advocacy groups who have been calling for changes in our nuclear programs and policies, as well as our modernization plans. More specifically, there's discussion and pressure on this administration to either delay or cancel the LRSO and the GBSD. Can you share your thoughts on whether that would be a wise course of action or not?
First, I'd say here, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm very pleased with the President budget for 17 that's over here in terms of meeting the direction and efforts here to modernize where we need to, not just the nuclear weapons, but all the way through the National Nuclear Command and Control, capability sensing apparatus, and what have you. From my perspective, we need to modernize those things, and the future for our intercontinental ballistic missile program is very important. So moving forward with the ground-based strategic deterrent, GBSD as we call it, is paramount in terms of the capabilities we need for that part of the triad. And from an air leg, you mentioned the long-range standoff cruise missile. That missile, too, is very important in terms of having an effective air leg. In order to have comprehensive deterrence, this requires us to have a complex problem for an adversary. And consequently, I would say today, we really need to make sure our triad is a credible capability, not just today, but well in the future. And that's why those programs are so important.
Great. General Rand, the same question, but I would ask, in addition to discussing whether you think it's wise to postpone or delay or terminate the LRSO or GBSD, these same advocacy groups are arguing that any alternative, and I make the reference because you made reference to it in your opening statement, that we should instead just try to further upgrade or modernize the Minuteman III. So share your thoughts on those.
Yes, sir. Well, I welcome that opportunity. I would break it down into two areas. I look at weapon systems, and there's two issues I'm concerned with: reliability and survivability. In reliability, we get the greatest vote in that. In survivability, the enemy and potential adversaries have a vote in that. Our current systems today are becoming increasingly difficult to remain reliable. They're getting old, and it's harder. And certainly with the enemy's vote and the increasing A2, AD environment that we're going to be operating in if we use nuclear weapons and or our conventional weapons, it's much more difficult. And so GBSD and LRSO, in my opinion, are very, very important that we go to that so that we can make sure that if we ever use these weapons as intended, we have a high probability of success that they will hit their intended target. And so delaying those would be of great concern to me.
What about the efficacy of just upgrading the Minuteman III as opposed to replacing it with GBS?
Sir, I think that is unwise. I think that for many reasons, the Minuteman III now is coming up on its 50th year in service. It's difficult. There are efficiencies to be gained with a new system, a lot of efficiencies with manpower, with command and control, with the reliability, and certainly then the survivability aspect of that weapon. And from a cost savings, I know we talked about there will be some costs associated with this, but over the lifespan of the program, we will make a lot of efficiencies that will start getting return on the dollar when we go to this in terms of manpower, the maintenance requirements, and the command and control, our facilities that we have. So there's a lot of benefits that will come with that over the course of the lifespan.
Great. Chair recognizes the ranking member for any questions he may have.
I too would like to welcome the distinguished witnesses, and I'll be very brief. I have two questions on topics that are coming up in conference. First, Admiral Haney, is there any military requirement to keep the W-84 cruise missile warhead that has been slated for dismantlement prior to 2009? That had been slated for dismantlement prior to 2009.
Congressman Cooper, I don't, once a piece goes into the retirement listing there, to me, it's ready for disposal. And those associated weapons, like the W-84 that are there, in my mind, should be disposed of. The only savings of as we look at our inactive stockpile as a whole, is to ensure we have the requisite parts and pieces, if you will, in case we have a technical or a geopolitical issue. But for the W-84, it's not one of those from my standpoint. I think it may be good to ask General Klotz a similar question from an NNSA perspective.
General Klotz, do you have a viewpoint on that?
Mr. Cooper, are we going to have a classified session after this? Is that still? I'd like to take that to a classified session, if I could.
General Klotz and Admiral Haney, regarding the NDAA that the House passed, the provision regarding restricting dismantlement, what are the consequences for the life extension programs if we restrict dismantlements the way the House passed NDAA suggests? Does that also have to be held for classified?
No, that doesn't. I'd be very happy to address that, Congressman Cooper. As you know, the administration had requested in the President's FY17 budget request that we increase the funding available for dismantlement. We've been spending roughly about $50 million a year to do dismantlement, which involves largely disassembly work at the Pantex plant in Amarillo, Texas, and the Y-12 plant in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. We wanted to increase that to $67 million to accelerate the process by which weapons that are already retired, are already in the dismantlement queue, would be dismantled. Part of it was to live up to a pledge that Secretary of State Kerry made at the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty Review Conference in New York last year that we would accelerate dismantlement. We also saw it as an advantage in the sense that, one, it would allow us to hire more technicians at both Pantex and at Y-12. We estimated about 30 to 40 at Pantex and about half that amount at Y-12. Now, while those people would initially be trained to do dismantlement, in order to do that work, they would have to get the necessary security clearances and some of the basic skills associated with working with nuclear weapons, so that we could also, at some point, use them for other key and critical work associated with life extension programs, surveillance, and other sorts of things. So we continue to think that that is an important thing for the country to do, and it's an important thing for NNSA to be able to do.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also thank you for holding this hearing, and thank all of you for how you're serving our country. There's a lot of chatter out there from some disarmament advocates pushing a no first use policy. However, President Obama considered and rejected that type of policy in both the 2010 Nuclear Posture Review and the 2013 Nuclear Employment Guidance. So, Secretary Scher, do you agree that before we would ever adopt, and I would hope we wouldn't, but before we would ever adopt a no first use policy, we would want to consult with allies like NATO allies or Asian allies such as Japan and South Korea?
Certainly, I think there's no question that one of the key pieces to our declaratory policy is not just deterrence against conflict with the U.S., but protection of our allies, and hence I would imagine and could not imagine that we could change the policy without talking to our allies and friends who would be affected by this.
And there are no such discussions taking place currently?
No such official discussions are taking place. There has been no decision within the administration to change the no first.
Thank you. That's reassuring. Admiral Haney, when the Nuclear Posture Review says that the U.S., quote, will work to establish conditions under which such a policy, the no first use policy, could be safely adopted, unquote, has there been any, has the U.S. come any closer to achieving those kinds of conditions that would allow for a safe adoption of a no first use policy?
Congressman, in terms of the conditions that would be required, not at a good position to list what those are here in this open hearing. I would just say that we know the current policy has served us well over many years, and that it will get, if there's some movement to change that, would require some scrutiny to make sure we're not going to impact strategic stability at large by such a move.
Well, could you then comment on how such a policy, were it ever to be adopted, would be a limit on a future commander-in-chief in a maybe an unacceptable way?
Well, I would just generalize and say that, as I look at part of my job as Commander Strategic Command and what I am responsible for in developing plans and what have you, the real key for me is making sure I can maximize presidential decision space and options. So that's sort of the approach I would put globally to most of these things.
And what would be your best military professional advice regarding whether the U.S. should adopt a no first use policy or not?
Well, given the earlier question that Chairman Rogers asked associated with were our the strategic conditions around the globe that I outlined, I would want to ensure that we had some serious deliberations in terms of trying to balance how that would help if you were to change that in terms of its impact on strategic stability. So, I only have a personal advice in this regard that we need to be very careful given the directions and developments that we see around the world, that we do everything in our power to maintain strategic stability.
Okay. And would anyone else care to comment on the desirability or lack of desirability for a no first use policy? Secretary Scher?
I think The decision was carefully considered a number of times, as you noted, and I think the administration currently feels very comfortable with where that is. Of course, this president and any future president should always take a look at the environment, understand what capabilities we bring to deterrence, what the security environment looks like, and one would hope that any decision would be made based on what increases our strategic stability. And certainly this president could make a decision one way or the other, as he already has up to this point, and a future president will also want to, I would assume, look at all those conditions and make a determination for him or herself.
Okay, thank you all for your answers. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Gary Mendy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the hearing. And gentlemen, thank you for all of your service, your thoughtful action and work on these issues. I want to get a couple of numbers out of the way right away. Mr. Scher, you said the total cost over 20 years is $350 billion to $450 billion. And the Congressional Budget Office says that for the next 10 years is $348 billion. These numbers don't quite coincide. Could you further explain why you've made the 20-year estimate at a range that might even be lower than the 10-year estimate from the Congressional Budget Office?
Sure. Congressman, I can't speak to the CBO's numbers. The $350 to $450 billion is what we believe, and we have to make estimates at some point when you're looking out that far. Over the course of 20 years, it will take to recapitalize the 3 legs of the triad. So what it takes to modernize each one of the legs, that includes things such as the Ohio Replacement Program submarine, LRSO, the GBSD replacement of Minuteman, and also the B-21. So it's those particular modernization acquisition programs.
Does that also include the weapons?
It includes the deliveries. It does not include the warheads.
Okay. I think what we need here, because there's obviously some significant difference in estimates, and for some time we've been asking for serious estimates beyond the 10 years, and apparently you have that available. So if you could make that available to us, it would be helpful, because this is an ongoing debate as to what this is going to cost.
And we've had this conversation before, and I will go back to look at providing as greatest clarity as I can from the people who do the budgeting.
Well, you just said it. You just gave us great.
And I can defend the $100 million difference, the estimates.
We'll give it to you in writing, and if you'd please respond in as great a detail as you have available, that would be helpful.
Of course.
In your testimony, you also talked about to deter massive nuclear attack, the United States must maintain a force that is invulnerable to disarming strength. What is that force? Is it all of it, or is it part of it?
So it needs to be invulnerable to disarming strike.
Invulnerable to a disarming strike.
Right. So the concept behind the statement is the idea that we do not want to have an arsenal that any of our potential adversaries would think that they can get rid of, that they can eliminate on their own in a first strike.
Okay, so therefore, in your view, each of the 3 legs of the triad is vulnerable to a first strike. Is that correct?
The submarine force currently, I would ask the operational folks to weigh in, but I think some are more vulnerable than others. Certainly, there are known locations for certain pieces. There are unknown for others.
Then, Admiral Haney, are the submarines vulnerable to a first strike? All of them, part of them, new, old?
Congressman Giramendi, the only time a submarine is vulnerable is when it's in port. The rest of the time when it's underway, it's underwater, stealth conditions.
Is it not our strategy
vulnerable.
to always have more than one underway?
That's correct, sir.
Therefore, they are not vulnerable to a first strike.
That's correct.
How does that work, Mr. Scher, from your statement? Don't answer, just rhetoric on my part. I think the rest of this should be in closed session, so we'll go there. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from the great state of Alabama, home of the 2016 National Football Champions, Mo Brooks, for any questions he may have.
I love that introduction. Secretary Scher, this committee has heard that the administration is considering extending the New START treaty with Russia for an additional 5 years, even though the treaty limits don't even take effect until 2018 and don't expire until 2021. So this would be extending a treaty 5 years early and pushing expiration out until 2026, which is beyond the limit of the next president's 2 possible terms. If true, this action drastically limits the options for the next 2 presidential terms. For instance, he or she would have no leverage to get Russia to include a vast stockpile of tactical nuclear weapons in an arms control regime. Reducing the number of Russia's thousands of tactical nuclear weapons must be a priority, as the Senate said when it ratified the New START treaty. Russia's conduct under Mr. Putin is remarkable, violating the INF Treaty in multiple ways, failing to comply with prohibitions on chemical and biological weapons, invading and annexing parts of the Ukraine, threatening NATO with nuclear weapons. The list is long. Tell me, is the Obama administration going to seek to extend the New START treaty before its term is up in January?
So, Congressman, I do not know the answer of whether or not that the administration will make that determination. Certainly, it is an option that is given in the treaty, but it is also not something that must be taken up.
Who, in your judgment, would know the answer to that question?
In the end, it will be the president that gets to make a determination of whether or not he believes it's in the United States' interest to extend the treaty as called for, as allowed for in the treaty.
Anyone between you and the president who would also have knowledge of that and have the answer?
There are ongoing discussions, as you've heard, but I really am not at liberty to talk about ongoing discussions before decisions have been made.
We know that the Obama administration had the intelligence community put together a national intelligence estimate prior to the New START treaty. This is standard practice, so we know what we're getting into. Has the national intelligence estimate been put together for a possible extension to the treaty?
I don't know of that one has. I will tell you, however, that the intelligence community is consulted before any decision of any type like this, whether or not tasked in a formal NIE or not.
Secretary Scher, let me move to a separate but very much related topic. The rumor mill is swirling, which is often the case on Capitol Hill, thanks to the small in number but very vocal disarmament advocates in Washington. You can help us put a rumor to rest. In December of last year, Undersecretary of State Rose Gottmoller testified to our subcommittee that the administration would not seek a prohibition on nuclear testing through a United Nations Security Council resolution. There's been talk of pursuing that avenue to skirt the United States Senate, which is unlikely to ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty anytime soon. Undersecretary Gottmoller said to a suggestion that they might pursue that option, quote, "I have been in constant battle with our NGO colleagues over this issue. We do not agree with this notion," end quote. And when asked for assurance that this would be pursued, she responded, quote, "Correct," end quote. Can you assure us again that this path is not being considered and will not be pursued by the administration?
Again, I can't disclose what's going on, but I can assure you that there is, and understanding I was coming before you and thinking this might come up, I actually talked to the Undersecretary Rose Gottmoller, and she assured me that there is nothing that she is thinking of. She stands by the statement that would take away the prerogative of the Senate for ratifying treaties.
Thank you, Mr. Scher. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from the great state of Washington, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Home of the 2015 rowing champions, University of Washington Huskies. Maybe we don't play football as well as you down there in Alabama, but it's not the only sport, believe it or not. Secretary Scher, you might know that some of the conversation that we have in this committee, especially on this side of the aisle, goes to the affordability of the modernization. And in your testimony, in your written testimony, said that the $1 trillion number is a mischaracterization. And I guess my question to you, though, is where do you think it comes from, first? Second, if after 20 years you're at $450 billion, and then we really start to spend money over those next 10 years, I could see a world where we, in my mind, where there's $1 trillion over the next 30 years. I don't know that I'll be here. I know you won't be here, sitting here. Maybe somewhere else, but not sitting here, perhaps. So in your view, where does this come from? Because the main issue, and General Rand and his verbal testimony at the end basically invited us to ask him, and you're great, I like you, but basically invited us to ask you how great nuclear modernization is. I think it's great. It's greatly expensive as well. And the debate is less about whether or not it's needed. It's more about you're leaving us a gigantic obligation, what everyone loves, but if I go to the readiness subcommittee, they got everything they love over there, or they have things they love, and go to the other subcommittees, they got things they love too. And pretty soon, we don't have a $580 billion defense budget. We got something much larger because everybody gets what they love and no one has to make any choices. So where do you think the number comes from? And what are you all doing to convince, well, maybe not all of us, but certainly me, that you're prioritizing at all? Because I don't think that you are.
So thank you, Congressman. I can't tell you where the number comes from. Obviously, it's a big number and it makes a splash. And I think, depending on how you want to calculate costs for how long, you can get to any number of numbers that you wish. What I know of is that the modernization piece is what I said. And again, it's a pretty big range, given that we have so much uncertainty out into the out years, which is why it's hard for us to always pin this down. There also are additional costs, no doubt. One of the costs is the weapons themselves, the warheads. One of the costs is sustaining these pieces, the operations and maintenance piece. So I'm sure you can piece together many different expenses on this. And all of these are known for today, but not known for tomorrow. For example, FY17 sustainment of our force is approximately $12 billion a year. That's for the entire force. One would imagine, and what acquisition people tell me is when you have a new system, it actually costs you less to maintain, although overall costs will go up as well. So I don't know what that number is going to look like out in the future, but that's sort of another piece to the cost, is those sustainment costs. In terms of affordability, I've said it before, and I will be forced to repeat it, it is about prioritization. We in the Department of Defense feel that this is such a critical mission that we must prioritize it at the top, and that, in fact, we will look to take risk elsewhere because it is so important that fundamentally we have nuclear deterrence covered appropriately, and we believe, and the administration has determined, that the triad is the best way of doing that. It does mean that there are costs in other places, and we always present what we have as a budget that is balanced. It gives me the opportunity to say that sequestration would, of course, throw almost all of this up into the air into great risk across the board. So we hope that we can get out of the situation where we're worried about a $100 billion cut based on sequestration that we have not programmed for and would have to go back and take a look at the full range. But even then, your priorities are affordable if they're your top priorities.
Well, I guess I've got 30-some seconds left. And maybe the problem is with the committee, because this subcommittee thinks we're first among equals in the money we should get, and the other 6 believe that as well. But we don't have that debate. Everyone avoids that debate on this committee, on the whole committee, that everybody does get what they want. But if we are the first among equals, and what I heard you say at the top of the department, there's a commitment to the nuclear modernization. You didn't say first and foremost, but you almost said it. Then maybe we need to get there too, but I don't know that we will. I've been on this committee 16 years, and I always said before, the most dangerous thing to give the department is everything it wants, because there's no priorities, and the second most is not giving it enough, because then you're not doing all the right things. And we haven't found that balance here. So, happy vacation, committee.
I thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Utah, Chairman Bishop, for any questions he may have.
I don't get any state accolades here.
The great state of Utah, home of the Utes. How's that?
That's good enough. That's good enough. General Rand,
Pac-12 baseball champions.
What is a Ute, by the way?
Pac-12 baseball champions, Rob.
National baseball champions.
Thank you. They're still the Utes, yeah. General Rand and Admiral Haney, I appreciate you being here. Let me help me make sure I got this right. The Air Force did conduct an analysis of alternatives on the ground-based strategic deterrent program. And as I understand, you looked at a simple life extension of the current Minuteman III, and the results were, I think I got out of it, you wouldn't actually save any money. And secondly, that the military effectiveness requirements would not be there, assuming the adversary continues on their present defensive capability improvements. So let me ask you, General, and then Admiral, why won't this actually save money? Why won't it meet military requirements?
Sir, when we looked at the life extension over a 50-year period, which is fair to look at for a Minuteman III, the study revealed it would be in $160 billion. For the GBSD, as we're working our requirements and what we feel our best gouge in our analysis is, we can do that same period of time at $159 billion. And then the efficiencies we will gain in terms of manpower savings, security forces, the command and control, the reduction in some of the facilities that we need, not having to go out and do the maintenance on some of the launch control centers that we have to do. There will be, in that same period of time, additional savings. Again, writing checks you can't cash yet, but we're thinking up to $20 billion over that same period of time.
All right, and the second part of that was, if you just simply extend the Minuteman III, that does not meet our defense capability.
No, sir. And what that doesn't do, the Minuteman III, and this is my key point, is it doesn't address the survivability piece. If that weapon is used, and if we're not willing to use it, then why have it? If that weapon is used to be a deterrent for this nation, then it needs to have a high probability that will get to the target that it's intended for.
All right, well, thank you. Admiral, let me ask a slightly different question then, so I think you got the answer right there. If the Minuteman III then is advanced in aging and we stick to the current schedule for the GBSD program, what would be the consequences if we don't stick, if that GBS program then is delayed?
Congressman, if that program is delayed, it really puts one leg of the triad at significant risk as we go forward from, as was stated, from a reliability standpoint, as well as we continue to test, which we have to, and very important as the system matures to keep your testing program underway. The number of missile bodies that we will have will also go below my requirements. And then finally, we have age-out problem associated with the rocket engines themselves as we go forward. So when you add all that together, it puts the strategic stability in our deterrence capability at significant risk if we were to lose a leg of the triad like that.
Okay, then let me go to Secretary Scher, if I could. We still have not seen a request for proposals for the first phase of this program, even though I think this committee was assured that that was going to happen in April. Why do we continue to see a delay in milestone A decisions to proceed with this program, if indeed that is such an important element to do that?
The Department of Defense and the acquisition side that is looking at this continues to go through this process. They're looking to get out an RFP after the DAB and Milestone A, which I'm told is in early August. And the acquisition professionals I spoke to said that this is, they believe this is along the lines with normal practice, but are absolutely looking to move this forward as soon as possible. And we have money in the budget to go forward with this when we get through Milestone A.
So they recognize that this should have been, was scheduled to be done in April, which is now almost August, and it might be done in August.
Yes, Congressman.
Well, it seems to me that there's some holdup in the desk at maybe the Undersecretary for AT&L. Is that basically what's going on?
I honestly, sir, there's a reason I'm not an acquisition professional, and I don't know the answer to that. But they have told me that they are moving forward and expect it to be done in August.
Well, you know, this committee is considering Senate proposals to dismember the AT&L organization, and it doesn't really help us to support the continued existence when necessary programs seem to be delayed and not necessarily appropriately delayed or not having a good reason for it. And I'm over by 7 seconds. I apologize for that. I yield back to the chairman from the great state of Alabama that does have a mediocre football team that lost to Utah in the last bowl game we were together. But other than that.
Roll Tide. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from the great state of Louisiana, home of the LSU Tigers, Dr. Fleming, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you, General Rand and Admiral Haney for being here, and the others, General Klotz. Let's talk about a statement made by Chief of Staff, former Chief of Staff General Welsh. If he could, he said that if he could comment on the weapons station facility recapitalization programs in terms of timeline and what can be expected for the future. General Welsh indicated that Barksdale Air Force Base would begin in FY18, but he later explained to me that the program would slip 1 year to FY19. So how confident are you that the weapons storage facility is on track in terms of technical solutions and the budget? And what do you need from this committee to stay on track?
Sir, I'll take that one. I think that's a very fair question. The complicating factor with the Barksdale is that the WSF, that's what we'll be calling them, weapons storage facilities, for bombers is more complicated than it is for our ICBMs. And we didn't want to come out the chute and have Barksdale be the first one we do, because it is going to be more of a technological challenge for us. And so we wanted to use the one at Malmstrom first and make sure, not that we would fail there, we're not going to fail, but that we didn't get in over our head before we went to Barksdale. And that was the reason to go to 19. We're on track to meet that. There are dollars for that. It's in the fight up. I am very confident that is a top priority. Why I mentioned in my statement, one of our priorities is the WSF recapitalization and modernization.
Yeah.
And I'll keep you appraised of, you personally, I'll keep you appraised of any changes to any timelines.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and all that's all very logical. I just wanted to make sure we are on track, remain on track, and there are no other complicating factors. Okay. Again, for Admiral Haney and General Rand, there's been sufficient discussion as to whether or not the nation should build a new nuclear cruise missile. The opponents of the missile come on to Capitol Hill. Other notable officials, such as William Perry, argue a cruise missile is destabilizing and unnecessary. In Dr. Perry's case, he argues that the B-2 bomber anti-gravity nuclear bomb, the B-61, will be, quote, around for decades, end quote, to come, and ultimately we will see a new stealth bomber, the B-21, of course, making the standoff cruiser unnecessary. So I would like your perspective as whether a small number of B-2s, which was first made public in 1989, and a new bomber, an aircraft that hasn't even been built yet, the B-21, will be able to guarantee access to a complex threat environment. And hopefully, should the B-21 be built on time and on budget, will that new aircraft entirely eliminate the need for a standoff capability?
Sir, I'll take the first crack at it, and then I'll defer to my boss. It is my humble opinion, I think, to address that question, you have to answer, why do we need a long-range standoff weapon? Whether it's the current outcome or the LRSO. And so there's several good reasons why you want to have standoff capability. One is survivability again. You don't want to get into the eye of the tiger if you can avoid it. It gives the president flexibility. It gives crews flexibility. It causes the enemy targeting challenges. It allows you to not go as far with your bombers, not need the same amount of tankers. There's a lot of efficiency. So when you address why do you need standoff, I think it's fairly indisputable. So then you go, why do we need an LRSO then? As you said so well, the B-21 will start being delivered in the mid-20s. We'll continue delivering those into the 30s and 40s. The B-52, which is solely reliant on the outcome right now, the airline's cruise missile, is going to be with us for a long time, and that is the missile of the weapon of choice for that. And that would significantly hinder my boss here in his targeting requirements that he has as a STRATCOM commander. Sure. And the outcome is aged out. It is a 10-year missile that is in its 30th year. It's having difficulties maintaining its reliability, but more importantly, the missile will not be survivable in the ever-increasing A2AD environment. So if we want that weapon to have a high probability of hitting the target it's intended for, we need a new weapon system, a new LRSO. It's not a new concept,
Right.
and it's not a new warhead. But to get where it needs to go, we need to invest in the LRSO. Boss, I'll defer to you.
I would say I echo all of those statements. First and foremost, we have an air-launched cruise missile now, and we would be ill-advised to allow that to just go away and not have it replaced. When you look at my capability today, and as mentioned, our B-52s will be around well into the 2040s. And as a result, in order to have a sufficient air leg, not having the B-52 as part of that would be really, really bad from a deterrence and strategic stability standpoint. We have one now, and we need to continue to have one to avoid making a less complex problem for any adversary that may think they can escalate their way out of a failed conflict. We want to keep that contained, that restraint is a better option. I would also say it's very important to our extended deterrence commitments as we go forward in terms of having that kind of capability. So that's what I would add to it. Really an impact to strategic stability if we lose that portion of our air leg going forward.
Right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Mr. Breinstein, Oklahoma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Scher, I wanted to have you talk for a second about the triad. I believe that each leg of the triad complements the other legs of the triad. I have heard many people suggest that it's redundant. In fact, maybe even some people on this committee have suggested that. Would you comment on whether or not you believe it's complementary or redundant?
Certainly, this administration has determined that these are complementary. Certainly, there are a lot of things, there's overlapping capabilities. Of course, this is what has kept strategic stability for decades. And I think we all believe that having these overlapping capabilities to, as Admiral Haney said, change the calculus and complicate the calculus of any adversary is, in fact, not just redundant, but important to the strategic stability. Each leg, as you said, has its own particular piece. The submarines, as noted, are the most survivable of them. The air leg is one that, when generated, is the most is easiest for messaging because it can be seen. It also is the most important for our allies. That the extended deterrence that they see comes from those kinds of options, as well as with the lower yields of those weapons. And as well, it is a recallable one. Until you have actually launched the weapon, it takes hours for an aircraft to be able to get to a point where before it would launch, and they can be called back at any time. Obviously, the ICBM force is the most responsive. It has highly secure command and control, and it strengthens deterrence by ensuring that the disarming first strike that I mentioned about isn't possible, and even if it could, that they would have to. There's no such thing as a small operation. They would have to go in massively to take that out. So it is all of these interlocking pieces that we believe, and that we have the evidence of decades has provided for strategic stability, even in the height of the Cold War, that we believe needs to be maintained. And that was the determination of the administration through the Nuclear Posture Review in 2010 and the Implementation Review in 2013.
Thank you for that. Admiral Haney, from a military requirements perspective, some have criticized President Obama's modernization plan as an, quote, all of the above strategy, seeking to replicate the Cold War arsenal or even start a new arms race. This argument, of course, ignores the 85% massive reduction in our nuclear forces since the Cold War and the elimination of entire weapon classes, including nuclear artillery shells, sea-launched cruise missiles, and other types of weapons. Admiral Haney, do you believe the administration's modernization plan reflects a desire to replicate our Cold War arsenal or start an arms race, or do you believe that it simply modernizes systems necessary to execute specific military requirements and missions of the highest importance?
Congressman, I would say no. The plan is not to build up for some Cold War. Quite frankly, it is the latter in the case of having a effective capability in order to maintain strategic stability, deterrence, assurance, and escalation control. And I would say when you look at the categories of things, warheads significantly reduced, 85% since about 1967 to where we are today, as you have mentioned, but also platforms. When you look at the Ohio replacement program, it's not the same number of submarines we have today, less tubes, and what have you associated with the design. So in many categories, we're only working to modernize and retain what we need in order to maintain.
So the idea that we're trying to create a Cold War arsenal or start an arms race, you would say that's false?
Quite the contrary, false.
Okay, that's good. Finally, Secretary Scher, from a cost perspective, I want to talk for a second about the cost of modernization and maybe put it into some perspective. When you think about nuclear recapitalization and conventional recapitalization, when you think about the entire defense budget, can you give us some comparison? What is between the two, conventional and nuclear?
Certainly. So nuclear modernization itself, as we're looking, is going to be less than 4% of the overall DoD budget. And even at its peak, it's about 11% of the total FY17 acquisition budget. So using FY17 as a baseline for what the acquisition budget looks like, the peak number would be at about 11% of the total. Again, we can't predict what our budget number is, so that's our best gauge of, if you will. But while again, it's a lot of money, but we believe it is important and it is sustainable.
Okay, great, thank you. And General Rand, final question. I heard you earlier, you mentioned that you made a decision on the best gouge at the time. Would you share for this committee what gouge is?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's just our best.
And I say that as a Navy pilot who's now in the Air National Guard.
Our best estimate.
Your best estimate. Got it. Okay. I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your dedication and service to our country. Not sure who is the best person to answer this question, but obviously very concerned about Russia and their focus on nuclear weapons, both strategically and in tactical nuclear weapons. And I wonder if you could, one of you could discuss right now their focus in terms of tactical nuclear weapons and their doctrine in terms of deployment of those weapons.
I think, let me talk from the policy perspective that we're looking at. I think one of the concerns we have is the state, certainly just looking at the facts of the modernization, and that's something we can go into in classified setting. It is concerning to see that there is clearly the Russians are clearly continuing to look at nuclear weapons as a clear and important part of their arsenal, and they are building it up both in size and type. Not beyond the limits of the New START agreement, to be clear, but in other areas we certainly see, and they have violated the INF Treaty, for example. Also of concern is the way they look to, I think Secretary Carter has said, saber rattling with nuclear weapons, how they are using them, how they are training with them extensively and in an increased manner. And finally, there's the idea that is floating around in military circles within Russia of the use to escalate to win a conflict, or escalate to de-escalate is often how it's referred to. And the idea that there could be a limited nuclear use that could hopefully stop a failed conventional crisis, and that they could win a conventional crisis that they might think they're losing or could lose by the use of limited nuclear weapons, as Admiral Haney spoke about in his opening statement. That is particularly concerning and dangerous. No one, Russians or anyone else, should think that they can use nuclear weapons to escalate their way out of a failed conventional conflict. The use of nuclear weapons would change dramatically and fundamentally the nature of any conflict. But those kind of issues are ones that we are most concerned about as we look at the developing environment and security environment, especially in regard to Russia.
And those are tactical weapons integrated with conventional forces?
That is a separate piece in terms of the actual what they're doing. They could use any different kinds of weapons, but certainly that is also a concern. Their integration of tactical with conventional units. And
it is a first strike doctrine, is it not?
They are not calling it such, but there is certainly the implication that of escalate to, work their way out of a crisis. We are certainly planning and thinking about that they would or certainly could do that in a worst-case scenario.
Anybody else? Secretary Scher, can you characterize the risk to national security if we fail to modernize our nuclear forces?
Certainly, and Admiral Haney, I think from an operational perspective, can add if he wishes, but if we do not modernize these forces, we will not have these forces available for use or operations. This is not a question of modernizing or keeping old forces. This is a question of watching them slowly age out of from our forces. So we would prefer to make decisions if we are to draw down our forces, if we feel the security environment is right and can do so with a willing partner. We would prefer to do any such reductions as part of policy, not as part of aging out of old equipment. So that, to us, is the biggest issue involved here.
Admiral Haney.
I would just add that the real key to deterrence is the perception of your adversary. That adversary has to understand that you have not just a safe, secure, and effective, but a ready and reliable and credible capability. And anything that detracts from that perception will cause that adversary to think that they may be able to do something, and we cannot afford that in terms of nuclear weapons, given the existential threat that they would impose upon our way of life in our country. I would also say that we don't want to default and lose a leg or a partial leg of a triad because we haven't modernized. And we are to the point now, as I mentioned earlier, that we can ill afford to wait longer. We are to the point now where we have delayed. The good news was our predecessors designed it, built to last, and we were able to do some life extension programs, et cetera. But now we're in a point where reliability, survivability, as you've heard today, will be at risk, and hence deterrence and our assurance to our allies will be of question.
General Rand, in looking at the next generation bomber, is the Air Force considering any existing platforms, any existing airframes to work off of, as they did with the refueler that was saved a lot of money? Mr. Chairman, can I take that for the record?
Go ahead and answer. Time's expired. Go ahead and answer.
Sir, we've been very fortunate. I can talk in more detail in the classified part. We've been able, with the B-21, we're going to be able to use a lot of hard lessons learned from current existing platforms. This is the family of systems, and it was built that way to augment and be able to work with some of our systems. And I can talk about what those are in classified as well. I would also say we've learned a lot from the B-2. And the B-21 is a Northrop Grumman product. That's not necessarily why we bought it, but there's a lot of resident expertise that will reside there with the company and with our partners. So I'm pretty confident that we're going to be able to get this platform on time, on schedule, and it's going to be a humdinger.
Thank the gentleman. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Ohio, home of the Ohio State Buckeyes, 2015 National Football Champions. Chairman Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that Buckeye shout-out. Gentlemen, I appreciate all the discussion that's happening today, some of it being incredibly technical. I want to go to just a policy issue or discussion on the issue of non-proliferation versus disarmament. And there's I think, a great deal of misconception that happens in the discussions of non-proliferation and disarmament. Non-proliferation being keeping weapons out of the hands of others. Disarmament is when you get rid of your own. And I want to go through a series of policy positions that I think you, in your evidence of your testimony today, you agree with. And then I want to contrast that with some issues that we're seeing in non-proliferation, disarmament, and then I'm engage the chairman in a discussion here on some further action items here. So with each of you, with our discussion today, it's my understanding that each of you believe that it is critical to the United States to field the LRSO and GBSD, correct? Every one of you, could you audibly answer? We'll go down. We'll start here, General.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
In the United States 2010 Nuclear Posture Review, it said that the United States would not announce a no first use or a sole purpose declaratory policy. You still agree with that policy perspective, do you not?
Sir, my personal opinion is yes.
I agree.
That remains our policy, yes.
I agree with Mr. Scher. That remains our policy.
Excellent. And you believe that Secretary Carter, Secretary Moniz, Chairman Dunford, they all agree also with the issue of the LRSO, the GBSD, the no first use or sole purpose declaration policies that we just discussed. You agree that there's consistency in their positions also?
Yes, sir. In my discussion with Admiral Haney, who's closer to those individuals than I am, that's what I've been led to believe.
Well, I would not want to speak for the chairman. I work for the Secretary of Defense and the President, so I'll leave it at that. But while GBSD and LRSO, I've had many discussions with the chairman. The other, I have not.
You have no reason to believe that they have a differing opinion?
I do not.
And I will refer to the current policy and the current budget up here, which supports all of the things you noted.
Good.
Yeah, I try not to speak for Secretary Moniz because I found he's extraordinarily articulate and a lot smarter than I am. I know certainly on the things which the Department of Energy and the NNSA have responsibility for, which is developing the warheads for LRSO and the warhead that would go on the GBSD. We're fully supportive of those programs.
Excellent. Now I'm going to ask you some questions that relate to a public information study that are widely held beliefs by the public, and ask your position and your opinion as to whether or not you agree with them. The public views nuclear weapons as the ultimate protective weapon. Nuclear weapons make us safe. The public views the world as a dangerous place. Are those opinions that the public has that you would also agree with? General?
Sir, I believe the world is a dangerous place, and I believe that nuclear weapons and its deterrent value can't be overstated, and that it does provide us safety and security.
Thank you.
I believe that one has to always look at things in a more complex piece. Deterrence is a complex issue, lots of parts and pieces, and I don't believe in just bumper statements.
But do you believe it's an essential portion of
But it is definitely, as I've stated before, opening statement, et cetera, that it is essential to our national security.
Excellent.
Nuclear weapons are a critical piece of our national security, and it's a dangerous world.
Well, as I said, Congressman, in my opening remarks, even though the Cold War is decades, the end of it was decades behind us, we still live in a very complex, dangerous international system, and that nuclear deterrence is a foundational capability of maintaining our security, but not only our security alone, but the security of our allies and friends across the globe.
This report goes on to say that the U.S. Public believes that the nuclear arsenal is an effective deterrent that dissuades enemies from attacking us. The thing that I'm reading from is from the U.S. and the world talking about issues with Americans, talking about nuclear weapons with the persuadable middle. It's a study that was done of the American public for the purposes of persuading them, not for nonproliferation, but of disarmament. And what's concerning about this report is, in addition to identifying, some of these studies were done in Indianapolis. They took engaged citizens and tested messages. And they came to conclusions. They gave this walkthrough of what you can and cannot say, with the goal being disarmament and our elimination of our nuclear weapons. They actually come right out and say that one of the things that you're not to do in talking to the persuadable middle is to tell them that your goal is getting to zero as your primary goal. It goes on to say that nuclear weapons should be presented as a security threat and as a risk to the United States, not as a security issue to the United States. Mr. Chairman, if I might, for a moment, this study was in this group is in part funded by Plowshares, and Plowshares, I've been given documents, apparently has significant investments that are in even the Cayman Islands. And there's a grave concern as to how this funds a message alternative that's somewhat disingenuous to the policy perspectives that you've just articulated. And I want to ask the chairman to join with me in taking the next step of looking at this discussion of disarmament versus nonproliferation and how the messages is being funded to try to dissuade the American public of the things that you just testified to, we know to be the case, with disingenuous statements and misinformation. So I'll be sharing this with the chairman. I hope to get back to you gentlemen and hope to have your assistance also in ways that we can counter the alternative message that I think makes your job harder. You come to
Mr.
ask
Chairman,
us for help.
Yeah.
excuse me, but you have very successfully put together a hearing here that is becoming extraordinarily one-sided, in part because my Democratic colleagues are not here. However,
Attendance is important, but, Mr. Chairman, I didn't yield the time that the additional time that you were giving me.
I'm sorry, but you're a minute.
Gentleman's time's expired. Go ahead.
If I might, Mr.
Gentleman from
Chairman.
California, go ahead.
To complete this, I want to congratulate you on the success that you're having in presenting one side of this argument. Others of us, myself and perhaps others, might disagree with many of the things that have been said here, perhaps because of our absence, which is our fault, certainly not yours. The other side of this story has not been told. First, nobody's talking about disarmament from this side of the aisle. Nobody.
But
All right? Listen, I'm going to make this clear. I've listened to at least half a dozen on the other side here, and this has gone on and on. Nobody on this side is talking about disarmament. We are talking about let's be wise, let's be smart, and let's recognize that there are limits. Now,
Chair's going to have
and I
to
would
intervene.
appreciate the opportunity
Has
to ask
recognized
questions.
individuals who are present for their questions. They can ask what questions they want to. Chair and I recognize the gentleman from Montana for 5 minutes for any questions you may have. Mr. Zinke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a former SEAL commander, I tried to stay away from nuclear weapons. Some of that earlier in my career, you may recall, we had the Man Portable one. And I was unfortunately selected that program. I'm glad we see it gone away. Having said that, the triad. Explain to me, in general, Rand, on the order and magnitude, if you're a rack and stack of operating costs and sustainment, what is the rack and stack of our triad?
I will talk to the two legs that I have, and I'll defer to Admiral Haney on the submarine. Right now, the ICBM, the operations and sustainment yearly is $1.2 billion. For our bomber fleet, that is $2.5 billion for operations and sustainment. That's pretty cost effective. That makes up approximately 5.4% of the Air Force's TOA budget.
And Admiral,
And if I may, the one thing with the bombers, I would, though, while it's more expensive than ICBM, so remember it's dual capable, we're also getting conventional use out of all our bombers that are doing multiple things at any given time. So that number is not just supporting the nuclear enterprise.
and Admiral, on the land.
Congressman, I don't have numbers with me today, so I'll have to take that for the record. I would just say it's more complicated than looking at a rack and stack of operating costs and what have you. It's attributes associated with each leg of the triad that have to be balanced with the associated costs. So to not have your most survivable leg of the triad would have significant consequences to the value of the triad as a whole.
Would it be safe to say that the land base is a cost-effective part of the triad, given that what it provides?
Well, I would say every leg of the triad is effective. When you say land-based, you're saying, I'm assuming, specifically intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Yes, sir.
But I would say the intercontinental ballistic missiles have certain attributes that are very effective in deterrent, others that are not so much. The business of being able to take a bomber and signal with it, as well as the flexibility with it in terms of things, is very important to the deterrence equation. The business of, as we discussed earlier here, not knowing where the submarine is gives it a unique survivability attribute, such that, again, no adversary will want to escalate their way out of a failed conflict.
Provided the seas remain relatively
Well, I will just say throughout my career, people have been trying to tell me that the seas are going to be transparent. I've done a lot of ASW in my years of service, and ASW is hard, anti-submarine warfare. It's not a trivial business, and I don't see in the foreseeable future the oceans becoming translucent.
Let me shift to part of the supporting the land-based is the helicopters. Throughout this process, we looked at it, we went back and forth, replaced the UH-1 Novembers with another aircraft. Initially, I looked at the Blackhawks. There was an existing contract that's just put them on there. It made sense from my perspective. I understand that fleet-wide, we need to take a little more time to look at it. Given that what's in the NDAA now is to have it at least under contract by 18 to allow bidding. Have we taken any steps forward since then to look at the requirements of
One thing I
replacing the
can
fleet?
tell you absolutely is Admiral Haney and I are absolutely in lockstep on is the need for a UH-1N replacement.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, now recognize the gentlelady from Missouri, Chairman Hartzler, for any questions she may have.
First of all, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to be here today, since this isn't one of my regular subcommittees. But given the topic of nuclear mobilization and the guests that are here today, certainly appreciate the opportunity to visit about the nuclear deterrent. And certainly glad to see once again you, Admiral Haney and General Rand, and as well as you, General Klotz. So the first question I have is for Secretary Scher, Admiral Haney, and General Rand. And it kind of builds on some of the questioning that was done by my colleague, Mr. Fleming, talking about the LRSO a little bit. But we're hearing arguments that the LRSO should be canceled because, and the reason is because air-launched cruise missiles are, they say, destabilizing because they could be either nuclear armed or conventionally armed, and that an adversary can mistake one for the other in a conflict. So are our current AGM-86 cruise missiles both conventional and nuclear, and do you consider them destabilizing? And along with that, do you believe our potential adversaries consider dual-capable cruise missiles destabilizing? So, Secretary.
So I don't. I think we have evidence to suggest that we have strategic stability with the current systems, which can be both nuclear or conventionally armed. So I do think that point of your argument raises questions as to why a system that would be recapitalizing and modernizing an existing system and not adding new capabilities would suddenly be destabilizing. The other piece, of course, is that destabilizing in the nuclear context means does the adversary believe that you can have a disarming first strike? And that is not something that is possible with individual LRSO or the outcomes. So I think we believe that this is, in fact, that strategic stability would be decreased if we did not have an LRSO to replace the outcome.
Well said. Admiral?
I would also add that our adversaries are also Russia, for example, has had air-launched cruise missiles of both variety. So we've had a history of the air-launched cruise missile, the Alcom, and it hasn't been destabilizing. So the argument seems very not very thoughtful in that we've had this capability. I think the thing that's destabilizing, if we let it decay and not have it, that will be destabilizing.
That's good. Thank you.
Ma'am, I agree with what's been said already. We've been using the Air Force and the Navy cruise missiles now for over 30 years, and there hasn't been any indication that it's destabilizing. I would also submit that if we went that at least for the air breather, then any one of our airplanes are dual capable, whether it's an F-16, the Strike Eagle, the B-52, the B-2, they all are carrying conventional weapons as well as nuclear weapons. So anytime they take off, you would have to ask then, is that destabilizing?
You anticipate my second point, my second question. Exactly. So we have the same issue with the aircraft because they are dual capable. Very good. General Klotz, I'd like to turn to you. What are the impacts to the NNSA if the LRSO and its warhead, the W-80-4, is significantly delayed or canceled? In particular, and you know, this is, I think I've met you before there at the Kansas City. So what are the impacts to the Kansas City National Security Campus as well as the Pantex plant, which do most of the production work, and the Livermore National Lab and Sandia National Labs, which have primary design responsibility?
Thank you very much for that question. First of all, let me emphasize there's been no decision made to delay the W-80-4 life extension program, and we're proceeding on the program of record as laid out in the President's budget, in our stockpiled stewardship memorandum, and in the National Defense Authorization Act, which requires the Secretary of Energy to deliver a first production unit of a life-extended W-80 warhead by 2025. This committee, I believe staff on this committee, had asked each of those organizations that you mentioned what the impact would be, so don't take my word for it. Let me just, if I could, in their responses, for instance, Sandia National Laboratory said, and this is, of course, responding to a hypothetical, that if this program were delayed by 5 years, we would need to move the newly trained staff on the order of 300 to 600 people to other currently undefined programs, or lose staff by attrition. And if we ever had to restart that program, we would have difficulty in recruiting, rehiring new people to do that. Same comments from the other parts of the nuclear security enterprise. As I mentioned earlier, we have very carefully phased programs in terms of our life extension programs. As we finish work on one or two of them concurrently, we're ready to move into the next program using many of the same skilled workforce, many of the same processes, many of the same components that are made in Kansas City and elsewhere. So if you have a 1 to 2 or 3 or 4, 5 year gap, either because of decision to cancel a program or because of lack of funding or extended CRs or whatever the case may be, it has an impact on our ability to get these jobs done on budget and on time.
Gentley's time has expired. I think the answer the panelist. Chair, now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Franks, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you. General Rand, it's good to see you again. Admiral Haney, appreciate you. I don't know the rest of you quite as well, but I appreciate you for being here. Mr. Chairman, I have a small document that was put together by my staff, and it sort of highlights a list of quotes from some of the senior DOD officials about why we believe that LRSO is so important, and I'm asking for unanimous consent to be allowed to be put in the...
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. I might just read a couple of quotes off of it, Mr. Chairman, from Secretary of Defense Carter in May of last year. He said, "The reason for the advanced cruise missile is to replace that missile, the missile that exists now, in recognition of the fact that air defenses are improving around the world and that keeping that capability to penetrate air defenses with our nuclear deterrent is an important one. I think it's important to continue to have a penetrating air-breathing missile for nuclear deterrence." That's Secretary Carter. Second one from Undersecretary of Defense Frank Kendall. "As potential adversaries acquire more advanced air defenses and nuclear forces, the credibility of our nuclear standoff capability will undoubtedly deteriorate. Our allies will feel this deterioration most acutely. And without the LRSO's advanced standoff capability, the bomber leg of the triad will gradually become a symbol of our decline rather than a bellwether of our enduring American strength." Admiral Haney and General Rand, I wanted, if I could, to ask both of you your professional military views on the LRSO. I know you guys have talked about it since before I got here, and I apologize that I missed it, but it's, in my mind, important enough to maybe reiterate anything that you feel would be necessary. Can you describe the military requirements that are driving the need for the LRSO, and how do deterrence requirements aging in our current cruise missile and bombers and developments in other nations influence this need for the LRSO? And I'll start with you, Admiral Haney, maybe go to General Rand.
Thank you for the question, Congressman Franks. The LRSO is very important to strategic deterrence, assurance, extended deterrence, and strategic stability. Right now, since we have the air-launched cruise missile, consistent with some of the quotes you read, to not have that kind of capability would be very destabilizing. Yeah. It would also make a less complex problem for any adversary. And since we do have adversaries that have nuclear weapons, it's important that our deterrence capability is credible going into the future. And we also have nations that have invested in not only their nuclear arsenal, but into anti-access aerial denial kind of capability. And that in itself has to be dealt with. So we don't want to dilute this problem for any adversary. We want to make sure that deterrence works not just now, but well into the future, and consequently we need that kind of capability. I'll turn it over to General Rand.
Sir, as I mentioned earlier, the professional airman for 37 years now, and the enemy gets a vote, and the improvements in the anti-access and aerial denial that the enemy now possesses and will continue to improve upon over the next 10 to 15 years makes a long-range standoff capability critical for us to be able to put bombs on target or missiles on target that are intended to make it to the desired target. So we need that capability. The current Alcom air-launched cruise missile has aged out. It is already 30 years old. It's increasingly difficult to make it reliable, keep it reliable, and it's going to be darn near impossible for it to be survivable if it's needed in the future.
Well, I guess I would be disingenuous if I wasn't glad you said what you just said. Let me just add one other layer to it. In your professional military judgments, what would be the consequences of choosing to delay or cancel the LRSO program? I know it's probably just reiterating some of the, but what about the delay?
A delay would put us at significant risk of impacting our air leg of the triad. Particularly important when you look at my air leg today, it's primarily made up of B-52. So being able to have that capability, not just today, it's a platform that will serve us well into 2040. And consequently, that's why it's also important. And as we look at future platforms, their ability to have standoff capability as we see these advances in air threats and what have you will be very important so that we can maintain strategic stability.
I'm the force provider on nuclear forces to Admiral Haney and the President, and I would have to tell Admiral Haney that if we continue to rely on the outcome past 2030, it'd be very difficult for me to be able to provide the resources that he needs to accomplish the mission.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Gentleman's time has expired. Chairman, I recognize the gentleman from California for any additional questions he may have.
First of all, if I might put into the record two pieces of writing, one by our ranking member of the committee, Mr. Smith, and another one by former Secretary of Defense, Mr. Perry.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Secondly, Mr. Chairman, when I approached you a few moments ago, you were saying that it was fair that everybody have a chance to speak. And indeed, that's true. But perhaps because my colleagues are not here, and perhaps because there's not as many of us on this side as there are on your side, fairness would seem to be more along the line of equal time. If that were the case, I would request exactly 41 minutes of questioning so that our side would have equal time with your side. Is that possible, Mr. Chairman?
Committee rules were established at the beginning of the Congress. That's not the way the rules work.
It is on the floor.
Not in committee.
So I guess the answer is no. Therefore, I'll take 3 minutes and 48 seconds to try to respond to the questions here. But first, let me congratulate you and your staff and your members for putting together a terrific show. One-sided, to be sure, and the kind of questions that the American public should be asking, including questions about cost. Mr. Scher, you were the most disingenuous hearing representative of numbers I have yet heard in this committee. And I must tell you, I'm very, very disappointed in you because you disassembled the truth by eliminating from the discussion extraordinary costs associated with the bombs, with the command and control, the production facilities, and the cleanup. So understand my disappointment. Your numbers are bullshit. Now, a couple of questions. Admiral Haney, Secretary Scher. The United States has uncontested conventional superiority, does it not? Conventional superiority. We also have undetectable submarines. Admiral Haney, thank you for your testimony here today about the submarines and whether they are detectable or not in two different questions, one from mine and one from one of my colleagues here. certainly gives us second strike capability. Does those submarines also give us first strike capability? Admiral?
Well, first of all, I would say our conventional capability is...
No, that's not the question I'm asking. I'm asking the question about the submarines. First strike, second strike, submarines good for both?
The submarine leg is designed to be the most survivable leg in order to provide us a second strike capability. But clearly, the President could decide how he would want to use the capability.
So the answer is yes, they're good for first strike as well as second strike.
They could be, yes.
Yes, they could. How much redundant? What is this all about? And the questions here and the discussion here would indicate that we're looking at these nuclear weapons for conventional, for normal warfare. Is that correct? Or is it only to deter any nuclear? What are we talking about here? What is this all about? The fundamental question.
I think first and foremost, in terms of references, you go back to the Nuclear Posture Review, it specifically cites that we have nuclear weapons in order to provide nuclear deterrence for our country, assurance for our allies. If deterrence fails, it is also my job to provide options to the President in order to carry out his orders.
So it's about deterrence. That's what these nuclear weapons are for? Deterrence.
It is to deter nuclear war. But if deterrence fails, let no adversary have any doubt that we have plans in order to deal with that have been also articulated in the employment guidance for the nuclear weapons.
Do we then consider these weapons also for conventional war?
Congressman, I think you know we have conventional options. And to your first point, you said we have significant conventional capability. But conventional weapons will not deter nuclear capability from an adversary.
So the answer is yes?
The answer is the answer I gave.
Well, then I'll interpret your answer as yes.
You want yes/no answers. I'm not into that game. I'm a commander of significant military capability. Deterrence is an important issue for our nation's survivability. Nuclear weapons provide an existential threat to our country.
Indeed.
We have to deal with it from a deterrence standpoint and an assurance standpoint to our allies.
Well, I would agree with you that the principal purpose, in fact, the only purpose, is to deter the use of nuclear weapons in any circumstance. Well, I've gone 43 seconds into my request for 41 minutes. I guess I'd best quit.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair would make note of the fact that Mr. Scher has demonstrated himself to be nothing but competent, candid, and forthright in his responses before this committee and every appearance, including this one. I've already noted that. Mr. Scher, you're welcome to take the floor and make any statements if you'd like to, and you don't have to if you don't want to.
I can't imagine there's anything I'd say that would solve the problem that Congressman Garamendi has presented.
Great. I do have one last question. And by the way, you'll be pleased to know, because we've had such a very fruitful dialogue here today, we're not going to have a classified annex session. But I would like to close, I've met with all of y'all before this hearing, and one of the questions I've got is, if in fact the administration did choose to go down the path of either delaying or attempting to delay or terminating the LRSO or GBSD, as a practical matter, how would they do that? Mr. Scher, do you have a
I think that's a question I've thought about as well. Obviously, the FY17 budget, which is still the position of the administration, is up here on the Hill for action. So obviously, that is you all have in your hands that issue. Certainly, we will work on and could develop another budget, but that would be for the next term to do. But I would emphasize that at this point, the decisions that hold that the President submitted to the Congress are the position of the Department and the administration.
Anybody have anything else to add to that? But your thoughts on that, General Rand?
So earlier it was stated that I almost welcomed to take on questions about that I was daring. My job is a force provider. I have two legs of the triad that I'm responsible for. They're old. They're wearing out. And if I am asked to provide forces to do a mission, I have to be candid and tell you there will come a point where I cannot do it with existing capabilities because they're not reliable or they will not be survivable. I am acutely aware of the costs associated with this. I will give the consequences if we do not replace these aging, wore-out systems. Other people will decide if we're going to have the triad. I'm going to tell you what will happen if we continue to use and rely on the things that we currently have. We need to modernize.
Great. Thank you all. This Congress and this administration cannot do its job effectively without the wise counsel of individuals such as yourself. So we appreciate what you have done for our country heretofore and what you've done for us here today. And with that, this committee is adjourned.